Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second talk in February. You're lucky this month. We have got a second talk. It's also the last week of February, but that's good anyway. So today, let's go through the slides. We've got our organizers, Martin, Dan, Mick, who's speaking today, Wagner, and myself. Let's go next. So here's what Mick's going to be talking about using Logic Apps agent loops. I've seen a few talks on that, so it'll be good to put a nice, concise integration feel to that side of things. And so let me hand over to Mick and remove that one and add Mick to the stage. Here we go. You've got the stage now, sir.
Thanks, Bill, and lovely to be here again. And it's always good just to tap back into the community and just take a moment, have a beat to just share and by all means, any questions or anything that you've got, then feel free to field them and send them through. Bill, there's nothing more than.
I'll pick any questions up and give them to you while you're talking.
Okay, fantastic. Nothing gives me greater pleasure than talking about integration. So with that, I'll get started. I've only got a handful of slides this session, and that's something remarkable for me. And I think it's also the way that I wanted to just set the context of this particular talk. So as Bill mentioned, what I'd like to do is to talk about these chat flows and agentic flows, as it's been called. And from where I sit, I do a lot of consulting and a lot of product development work and things like this. And there's a lot of questions around, as we all would have had many AI conversations just simply in our day to day. But there's many around, well, how do I get it to do what I want it to do? And that means many different things, but in particular areas of industry, whether it be manufacturing or construction or health or wherever, how do you do that? And education. So what I want to do is show you an educational slant today as a tool that I've been working on with some others, and we're part of a great team, and love to sort of share a little bit about that journey. That I'll call it a solution that's part powered by AI to bring about advancements in teacher-student learning space. And so it's important, the framing of that, but also just what it does. So I call it sort of building a helper. And whether that helper is in law, whether the helper is in construction or looking at architects' diagrams and surveyors' plans, and then coming back and building a whole bunch of rules and things as to how to deliver what has been done. Certainly in the software development world, I feel like I go through that every day, that someone out there has sold a solution and we've got to figure out how to build it. And so I want to sort of just talk a little bit about, what the problem space is. How do we, there's many things that now come into the consideration of, I'd like to have an agentic workflow, or I'd like to build a process. And so what tool do you use is some of the very first things that we'd like to try and work out. Is it a Copilot based tool? Is it a Copilot Studio based tool? Is it a Foundry based tool? Do I just use Logic Apps straight away as is? And so without the thing that Microsoft does really well is we don't get too caught up on the AI aspect of it. So we pick a model, we dedicate how we want to we want to get to that model, and whether that's in AI Foundry and the model may be internal, it may be an external model that we're talking to through a connection string or a variety of different things. Because as we're probably aware, what they've done really well, that you've heard about MCP servers and MCP clients and things, is they've normalized accessing models. I'm still a bit partial to things like semantic kernel. That gives me some features in the AI space that I really like that I haven't quite seen elsewhere just yet. Things like being able to define my own callable functions and have them running just as and when I need to. I know they can be done with tools and so on, but I just, I quite like that space in the middle of code and things. But so I think, what we've got in the AI world is certainly being able to have different callable models. Let's not worry about cost right now, but different callable models. And we've got it standardized through things like MCP server client type protocols, which for those of you that can remember, it's what printer drivers did back in the era of printers and so on. So, we certainly have come a long way since then, but the same problems exist. Hence, that's why, we're in the integration space. So when we start to build up our solution, then AI is really only one part of it. And everyone, there's a misconception that AI will do everything. I'll just write a prompt or I'll type something in and it's going to go away and do everything for me. Now, if you're sitting there at home wondering what recipe what to cook for a Sunday dinner with some friends coming over, not a problem. But once we go out of that space, how do you ensure it's correct, the answers that you're dealing with? How do you put some guardrails around it to say, I'd like to only get the answers from this particular passage? And there's a variety of different ways we can do that. Some, I think, work better than others. And let's sort of explore some of those things. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about what's various security options are there. And then what does a typical solution look like in terms of the moving bits and components and things? And then I want to sort of show you some of the examples and take you through a bit of a journey as to what some working examples would look like, right through to the end where I'll show you early versions of a particular product that I've been working on. And then obviously open it up to discussions and Q&A. So let's have a look. So in terms of creating a helper or an agent, but in terms of creating something that's going to be useful in your application, whether it be a helper for lawyers, a helper for whoever, for construction industry is one that I've been working with in recent times. And so we've got this notion here that here's a prompt. What's the best place to eat? And so that might sound simple enough. And we might do this 1,000 times a day or many times a day. And then what does that mean in our world? So how does it behave? Is it repeatable? So if I go back here and ask it again, you can see I'm using a particular model, 5.2. This is from the paid version of ChatGPT. And, what's the best place to eat? Now, maybe I'll get the same results. Maybe I'll get different results. And maybe I want different results in my solution. In my other solution, maybe I want the same results. So in the medical space, I'm looking at diagnostics and showing me a picture of skin cancers. I want consistent results. I don't want something new this time versus something old last time. Because if we're looking at skin cancers, then, you want to be able to say with a degree of certainty, this is the answer. You know, it's normal results or it's abnormal results. And I'm sure we've all had experiences where we've asked, you know, ChatGPT simple questions, and you look at it and go, actually, no, that's wrong. And then you go back to it and you say, well, actually, you're wrong because of this, this, and this. And the first thing it comes back with, oh, my bad, I'm sorry, you got me, let me correct it. Now, the more fundamental question there is, why do we give AI such an air of authority when it gives back the answers? And has it been the way it's been portrayed? You know, I would recommend scrutinizing every answer that we get back. And the challenge is, I mean, it's a great tool. And the challenge is that we're usually asking it questions about things that we don't really know anything about. And it will spit out something for us. Whether that something is right or not, we don't really, you know, we're in a position where we don't have the skills just yet. And, you know, certainly from a coding perspective, if you say, hey, I'd love for you to help me code, we've got enough coding history and expertise to be able to go, actually, that's not quite right. Let me instruct it, or let me work through that problem now, or the bug that you're now introducing. Just as a side note, I was working away and I knew that I wanted to pull an occurrence of something out of a string and then reverse it and do a couple of things. I thought it'll take me 10 lines of code to do. There was, you know, Copilot sitting on the side of my development environment. And I went, all right, write me a routine to do this. And it wrote me a routine back in sort of 30 lines of code. I copied, pasted, added the 30 lines, ran it, looked at the results and said, it's actually not quite right. Gave the results back into the AI conversation. It said, oh, you're right. You know, my code wasn't right. You got me. There's a bug. It's double escaped and this and that. Wrote me back another, you know, gave me the correct lines. I brought that in. 50 lines, went to 100 lines, went to 200 lines, then went to 300 lines. And I was debugging code in those 300 lines that you know, now it's a problem debugging, the challenge is debugging AI generated code. In the end, I just went, you know what? I'm going to go back and write my 10 lines of code. Now, and the only reason that we do that is because in a way, you've got a way to validate straight away that it's working, yes or no. And B, you've got some expertise that you can cast an eye over. So how does this behave is a pretty big question, right? And where does, in this particular case, what's the best place to eat? Where does it draw that information from? How can we influence drawing that information? And is it something that we can refine and control and fine tune and so on? Or are we just susceptible to the next model that comes out? And because of the investment, it must be right. So I think, as you know, it's a journey for all of us, this AI journey. And I think it's a very different context if you're doing something for work, or you're doing something as part of an app that you're building or you're releasing to the public, or you're doing something just, you know, at home, like you're playing around in your garage. And I think, you know, the context is really important, because if it's for work, there's a whole bunch of other things that come into play. Security. What about the data, the questions and the information that we're working with, going backwards and forwards to the model? How can you be sure that it's not leaving the shores, if that's important? How can you be sure that it's not being used for further training and being shipped off to somewhere else to you know, for training models and other things like that? So you really need to be sure of these things if it's for work, so that if the auditors come knocking, and you've got to be able to say, well, you know, our profile information, our personal information, our interactions doesn't leave. And, Bill and I, we're governed by the laws of Australia, so it doesn't leave our sovereign state. So there's some really interesting aspects that do come up when we're using it for work. And you want to be able to have accurate answers or accurate conversations. So what about for an app? What about for an app that goes across boundaries and suddenly is used in other countries? What happens there? How can you have a degree of control, a high degree of control as to the behavior of AI or your AI tooling? I tend to use and think of AI as a calculator with extra functions on it. It's great at all these certain things. It's great at summarizing. It's great at translating from one language to another language. It's fantastic at that sort of stuff. So me personally, when I'm pitching for a solution or for work or an opportunity, I'm careful to articulate that the platform or the solution is what's really being pitched, and it's part powered by AI, or it's got access to some AI capabilities that help in a particular area of the solution. It is not the solution. There's a lot of companies and a lot of offerings that say, hey, we're just, we sit in front of AI, look what we've done, we'll go and, make images and do all this sort of stuff, and that's what we do. Where we just need to be careful for that. So, really interesting considerations around that. And then, how do we secure this? What does security look like in this space? If I've got it working behind the scenes for my app, and then, how do I give it some knowledge, some data and things so that it can work off? So, and then, is it expensive? That's the other thing. So as developers, the cloud hosting areas before we never really thought about it too much, but with the advent of cloud hosting, how expensive is this stuff? Is my code that I've written conducive to higher costs or lower costs? Am I frequently calling something that costs money? Or can I cache it and just use that cache data locally and reduce the number of over-the-wire requests that I'm going to do? So there's many things that we need to think about, and certainly AI is one of those where costs can rack up pretty quickly. So just keep an eye out for that. And then, what about policies and audits and things like that? So if something does happen and someone comes knocking on the door and says, hey, this is, for example, worst case, we're going to sue you. You gave us bad information. What happens? So who's responsible? And what sort of policies, procedures, and understandings do we have in place? Can we audit everything? So can we go back to last Wednesday at 7:23 p.m. and look at the traffic and see what happened? Look at the interactions. And then, where does the buck stop? Oh, we're sorry, it was the model that gave us the answer. So these are, these are sort of maybe trivial, maybe not, but they're quite important when you start to include some of this software into, into your solutions. And usually there's a big disclaimer from third parties that say, click here to use our technology. And if anything really bad happens, we're never, ever, ever responsible. So it's just things to think about. So in terms of, what a typical system looks like, for a bit of a context switch, we've got our solution over on the right-hand side, and then, over on the left-hand side, and we might go through some sort of API gateway, API management, and then we've got our helpers in there, and there might be some industry-specific instructions. So for construction industry, We want you to do, to take the surveyor's diagrams, to look at the blueprints, to look at the architectural documents and come up with a proposal as to how this might be built, what the quote, what the scope, what the costings. And so AI can help in that space. And what I've found is that you still, in my world, you still need the experts. You still need the engineer that looks at the diagram and says, oh, that's, that concrete is near a wall that's over 2 meters high. The concrete then needs to be, 50 centimeters thick to support X, Y, Z. All this stuff that's not in the diagram. And it's this level of expertise that if you think about how AI models are trained, they go out and look at public data largely, and they look at the occurrence of public data and take averages off it. So they look at, all the various bits that they can get access to and go, oh, overwhelmingly, this has been the particular type of build that we see in the information that we're coming off, building a 2-story or a 5-story apartment block. Now, that doesn't necessarily make it right for all cases. So an engineer the expert who looks at this says, you know what, this is what I see, and these are the safety guards and other things I need to put into this. Now, where in that scenario, the engineer today isn't going to go away. You can't, you can't automate that in the sense. But what you can do is the admin tasks where they're saying, oh, where was that document again? Where was the proposal? Where was the requirements that the client wants? All that sort of stuff, we can make at their fingertips. We can give them a dashboard, we can give them a portal, and we can surface that so that they don't need to spend an hour, 2 hours, whatever it may be, doing the admin work. So yeah, absolutely, we can optimize the process. So the other piece of this is that where do we want to host our model? So as you can see in recent times, the war of the models is kind of heating up, and we'd like to have access to any which model that we'd like. Maybe it's an industry vertical one that we're after, medical space, diagnostics, rare diseases, or something else. But what we don't want to do is keep changing our solution for every different model. Now there's standardizations in terms of MCP and MCP servers and clients, semantic kernel. And I think Microsoft have done a great job in terms of their AI Foundry portal, where we can surface various services that we might want, speech services, for example, language recognition services. They're not necessarily AI models as such, but they're services that can help enhance and complement what we're doing. And it all sort of appears into the AI Foundry world, so that it's a bit like an integration hub in a sense, that then we can talk to the Foundry through a standard mechanism and take advantage of all the changing landscape. So today we might be hosting a model, using a model that is on AI Foundry, and we can have it as a per server call, as a consumption type model. We might be doing a piece of research work that it's more efficient for us to have a model running on a VM somewhere, and we can surface that in AI Foundry as well. Or we might be really impressed with what Google is releasing, and we'll go and access that Google model through the same mechanism just by going out and calling to it externally. And then a variety of different things, such as, some back-end APIs to actually drive the solution, core functionality, have databases, a data store. In the world of sort of AI, and what I see is that typically we were very concerned about the how and sort of the lines of code and what code and where things sit. And I think that's still a valid concern. We want to be able to, build a solution that's scalable, particularly now with the advent of, the interwebs and apps and things like this. Yeah. And that requires a specific set of knowledge around that. So, how do I build a scalable solution? How do I, make critical paths as short as possible? How do I use, async request response and push things onto queues and all this sort of stuff? Now, I haven't seen AI do that today because it's really sort of learned and acquired specific knowledge. But what I'm seeing is that will be built, and yes, it will be optimized and made more efficient. And now the discussion has moved up to the business world of talking to the business about what can be done and realizing their business goals using AI as a tool that you walk into boardrooms or you walk into, the C-suite with, and saying, well, let's build it part through AI and part through industry experience. Look, it's a changing landscape, and just watch that space. So the key that I've seen in recent times that really separates out a solution. So this stuff here is pretty standard, pretty stock standard in once you build one solution, 2, 3, 4, 5, you'll start to see commonality across what you're doing when you're incorporating AI and these sorts of agentic flows and things coming in. So what it really boils down to is the prompt and what sort of prompt that you're going to be using. So what I did was give you a little bit of a sample of a prompt that we've been working with and refining over time, and in the learning space, so student teacher learning guide. And so in this prompt here, we've got, you are an expert teacher, etc., etc. And then we'd like to give you, we'd like you to give our answers back in this kind of format. And then there's some sort of guide and various other things. Now there's also prompt advice and prompt best practices and things. But the bits I want to draw your attention to are things like learning goal, context, and chat history, if it's a chat type prompt. And what you can deduce from that is that through this process, we will supply that context and augment or enrich the prompt to pass into AI. So that the learning goals are this, the context that we've been going through is that, and the history is this. So what we're doing in this particular case is combining everything together and sending it into the AI and saying, you've got all the reference material that you need. You've got all of the context as to how we've been interacting. Give me your answer based on that. As you're probably thinking, there's only a certain size that these prompts can go to. And, 220K was sort of some of the last numbers that I was reading in some of the different models, but they take upwards of 30 minutes to come back with an answer. So it's not adequate, it's not appropriate for conversational style. So that's the problem, that's the challenge with AI, that once we start to deal with content, because what we're doing here is to say, I want you to get your answers from the stuff that I supply to you, not in the case of learning, not from some data set or some site that you've crawled in Northern America or Europe, because what they might be learning there, it could be different to here in terms of what they focus on or what they emphasize or whatever. You want to be able to say, well, in a teacher-student learning environment, here's the content. I don't want you to go outside of those rails. So this is one of the steps that we use towards, achieving that. But the problem is, or the challenge is, that this has an upper bound, that we can't supply a 300 meg textbook and say, here in the textbook, here's the textbook, base all your information off this textbook. So that's the problem. And that's the challenge. And I haven't figured that out yet either. So let's have a look at at some of these small working samples. And I want to sort of draw your attention to logic apps, where logic apps start to really just let us dive into the space of solving the problem and not having to worry about how AI is wired in any particular way. So let me go to here. Now, just checking, Bill, can you see my browser screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. All right. So where we are here is in the Azure portal. And from a logic apps perspective, I can come along and I can workflow. And the reason why this is really good is because it lets us jump straight ahead to an already built starting point. You can start to then think about solving the business problem that you're doing. And then there's a way later on down the track, by hosting in the logic apps environment, we can start to just use this at scale in an enterprise environment without doing any changes. And this is typically accessible via a URL. So we can hide that. We can put it behind APIM. You could consume it directly. I wouldn't recommend it. But, suddenly I don't need to make changes if I'm talking to one user versus 1,000 concurrent users. So I can select this, and I've got, create a different logic app. And then just down here, I've got my conversational agents and my autonomous agents. And so I know I referred to it, the MCP server and MCP clients. This is what this looks like. So we're suddenly talking MCP protocol without having to write an extra line of code, or we fit very nicely into that server tool type paradigm. So I'm not going to go through that, but I've essentially gone ahead and created one for us already. And I've just called it a basic helper. And I'm in the traditional logic apps designer experience. I've got a weather agent. So simply, this is an agent that will do loops through here until it gets the answer. Now, what I've got, and this is pretty special. So if I'm starting from scratch and, hey, we'd like to do a prototype or a proof of concept, Logic Apps is definitely the place where I favor to start with. I don't need to write a line of code. We don't need to have a discussion of, is it C#, is it an API, is it Python, is it who's going to host it, is it living in a container? There's a whole bunch of application infrastructure that I don't need to deal with. I think that this is, for me anyway, personally, it's on par with Figma, for example, where Figma is very easy to design screens and flows and things like that. And then you come to a point where you go, ta-da, look at it, and you can have a little walkthrough and run through. Now, Logic Apps in this space is great because it gives me a starting point. It's graphical. But it's also, once I hit save, Microsoft have built an enterprise-grade environment around this that can scale to the masses without me having to change anything. So with Logic Apps, I've got my variables. I've got all the usual things that I'm familiar with here. I can take things out of the request, start to then push things and supply various bits and pieces coming forward, through here as well. Now, various variables and parameters. So let me just talk you through the basics of this. And this is more the mechanics of how do I command AI to do what I want it to do. And if I click on my agent here, then the agent, going back to that part prompt, for example, the prompt that we saw just on the screen a little while ago, this is just a very stock standard example that you'll find on Microsoft Learn. I didn't want to change it too much so that you can get an appreciation of just how simple this is to get up and running and get started. And, things like you are an AI agent, you are an expert teacher, okay? And that's where this sort of stuff comes into it. And then there's various things in here which are user instructions. So for subscribers that live in the location, you are fetching the weather, be sure to include a joke about the rain or whatever. So I've just given it something else. Now, in true Logic Apps fashion, these sorts of things can come from variables, or they can come from, and I don't have a lot in this space at the moment, or they can come from, various functions. So I've got access to all this sort of stuff and supply, add various functions in here and parameters and look at dynamic content. And, it's my usual traditional environment. So if I want to send stuff through and change the behavior of the agent, very, very easy to do that in the Logic Apps world. So you'll notice down the bottom here that I've got these advanced parameters, and I want to just sort of talk a little bit about those. So in the AI world, I might want to indicate what my temperature should be and how random these things should be. And then I've got some other bits and pieces. So what sort of response type I'd like to have. Well, maybe I'll supply some text back, maybe I'll supply some JSON, and just some shortcuts. Sorry, just keeps doing that. Just some shortcuts around how I'd like to sort of have this behavior done. And that's my agent. So then if you think about, this is also an MCP server. So I've also got things like what sort of settings I'd like to have and what sort of retry policy. Also, in a general walkthrough on this, I'd like to limit maybe how many actions total I can go through. So with agentic flows, it tends to be what we call non-deterministic, depending on what I supply to it. So by that I mean, as the agent starts to run and there's AI behind the scenes that's sort of powering this agent, I've got my various tools, as they're called, and I can go and add another tool. And this is where, there's so many different ones. This is like connecting to other MCP clients or MCP servers. And so what Microsoft have done here in Logic Apps is take a lot of the standard connectors and a lot of the standard actions and things like that and surface them into the tool type environment. So I could do some data operations and enrich this particular loop, agentic loop. So I might want to go away to a database and essentially, pull in some information and say, I would like you to only work on these learning goals and pull that in. So if I add, and I'm just going to add one in, and you can see the experience that we get. So I've got a tool here. And the thing that differentiates the tools to the agent is the description that we enter in. So how does the agent know? And I'm just going to, and this is another flow. So, in sort of Logic Apps world, I'm just starting my actions. And for those of you familiar, this is, these are all the different actions that we can sort of use. What I'll do is hopefully delete this guy. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to delete this tool and come back to here for a moment. And so this particular tool says, I'm going to go away and get the weather for a specific location. I'm going to send the current weather by an email. And by the way, I get a list of subscribers, or I get a list of data. That's what this tool does. Now, for those of you that have played around with MCP servers and clients, GitHub, for example, has a whole bunch of, I go away and work on code repositories. I commit repos. I pull repos. I do things. So you can set these things up. I create PDF files. I convert text to PDF or whatever. So what I haven't done in here is to define the explicit flow of how something should run. So that's what AI does, and that's what the agent does in the background. So it says, okay, well, in my world, I know I've got a series of actions or tools or functions to use. Now, what I've got here is giving it instructions. You're an AI agent, going to go and create a weather report. You're going to go and send an email. You're going to go and do, this, that, and whatever. So inside, I've got to compose, and I've just got some data in here, and it says, well, I'll get you the subscribers that you might need. And I haven't gone away and said, well, this field out of this data is that, and so on. It's just basically doing that. Now, when I come down to get the weather, I've gone in and I've said, okay, what I'd like you to do is use a tool or use an action called get weather. And as you can see, there's a ton of different weather things to do. Let me try that a different way. I'll just try the MSN weather because I just want to get. So here's MSN weather. Get the forecast for tomorrow. Get the forecast for today. Just get the current weather. So I'm going to click that, and you'll go, all right. Now, when I've added this action on, it needs some details. It needs what the location is. And I've also got the units, which will deal with Celsius. So I'd like to have metric. Okay, great. So if you've built an action, a tool, or a function before, these are parameters that it takes. So whereabouts is it going to get the location from? And once again, I can bring in, I'd like you to pull something in from a piece of data that's floating around this workflow. I'd like to create a function. I'd like to add something from the inbound request or whatever it might be. But I've also got this little bot here, or this little sort of helper, which says select to generate an agent parameter. So what I can do is to click on that, and it will automatically create me a parameter that the agent understands in this workflow. Now, I'm not going to do that because I've already got one. And I'm just going to get rid of that for the moment. And it then creates something that looks like this. So it creates a parameter that says, hey, to run, I need something called location. And with this email, to run, I need a to, a subject, and a body. So figure that out. And then get data. I don't have any parameters. It's going to get the data for me. So the agent powered by AI is smart enough to know how to do this. I don't need to explicitly map it. Now, in this case, it's going to work. In other cases, if it gets more complicated, how do I know I'm going to get the right answers back? That's the $64 million question. So now if I go and run this, this one I can run because the data is coming from the data itself. So I'm going to go and run it. And we can look at the run. And this is the thing that Logic Apps does really well as well. So it's currently running. Down the right-hand side, you can start to see that it tells you how it went in the loops and how it went in the flow and things like that. So here I've got the weather agent went through 5 different loops. The first time it ran, it figured out to run get data tool. The next time it said, go and get the weather, maybe for Mick. Next one for Bill. Send an email, I guess, to Mick, and send an email to Bill in whatever order. I'll just double check. It'll have done, maybe it did in 2 steps, but if I have a look at if I have a look at the email, it's come through, and Bill, you didn't get one, but because I sent it to my address, but I'll just bring that out and just show you what it looks like. So here's your weather guide, Sydney, et cetera. Feels like, so it's gotten some weather, outputted as bullet point. And then there's why did the raindrop go to the party? Because it wanted to make a splash. All right. So maybe we can refine the level of jokes and things. Okay. So what we can do here is kind of send something through, have it run, and away we go. Now, I've also done something similar. So in terms of creating, I've also created a conversational style agent where I've now got a structure and framework and everything else set up, where similar deal, you are a weather agent. We can have a look at that. I've got various advanced parameters. Again, maybe I'll show all of them. We can look at reducing things. So in this particular case, I'm actually having a conversation with it. So I want to be able to have a conversation. I want to be able to have all the tools, select the models, things like that, determine some settings, and use all the variables and all the enterprise grade environment that I can, that Logic Apps provide, which is fantastic. So now to test these things, I can run it in chat. So there's some details that pop up that say, hey, and this is preview. So I've got my previous chats. I'd also like to create a new chat. So this is all just sort of testable code. And I can say, what's the weather like in Melbourne right now? So it's been sent, I believe. Maybe I never got a red there before. Oh, there we go. There we go. That's why I didn't get a red. Let me refresh this. But essentially, it's that similar demo, but we've just got conversational style working. Now, you might sort of say, well, why don't we use Copilot, or why don't we use Copilot Studio with all the various topics and things? Because it actually gets quite hard, in my opinion. It gets quite hard to manage all of the different topics and how you transition from one to another, where this tends to be context driven. So as this agentic loop is going through, it remembers the context and remembers how we're going within this conversation. So I'm just going to give that one more time. And it doesn't send an email. It basically should return it back. And I can go back to these things within a 24-hour period in the test environment to just keep testing. Yeah, okay. It's not going to do what I want it to do for some reason. Don't know. It was working like a second before I jumped on to this Prezzo. Anyway, so I wanted to give you just a bit of an idea and a bit of a feel of the environment that you get given. And it's got all the Logic App goodness in here that we can use. I've got things like run history and versions and all these other things which are really important. So now I want to come to things like, well, how do we, now we want to start to tailor the prompt and start working with the actual tool itself. To do that sort of stuff, I tend to come to just very stock standard, simple areas. So I want to get rid of everything else, all the noise. I want to be able to come back to a model and be able to just hammer away what my prompts may be, come back with a working model and refine it. So place where I'd like to start is, how do I learn maths? And then here I'm using ChatGPT. You want to learn maths voluntarily, fascinating. Most people approach it with, with the way they approach Kale. Here's no romantic truth. So it gives me a little bit of attitude. Now, and it comes down through here. And then now tell me, what level are you at? Basic calculus. I panic when I see fractions. And there's some pretty interesting stuff that goes on. I'm actually using a filter through here called Monday.com. Oh, sorry, not Monday.com. Monday, which is a GPT agent that essentially translates or gets hooks into the request and the prompt and then comes back. Now, the way to truly see this is by looking at the APIs, semantic kernel or type APIs, and see all of the different capabilities that we have. The best, simplest way to do that, I've just switched over to AI Foundry, which is, and I'm looking at a chat playground here, and I just wanted to show you all of the different options that we have available. So we can give the model the instructions. You are an expert teacher. Now, in here, I also can have different variables, examples, and also parameters and a context. So these are the things that I can really start to now go and say, well, this is now starting to work. What I'd like to do is drive it. So I'm going to have my queries in here. I'm going to set up the model here. And most importantly, I'm going to supply that prompt information. If I've got my prompt information, I'm just going to copy and paste it and throw it into here. Then, suddenly it's like, you are an expert teacher, you're proving one-on-one tutoring, et cetera, and start to really build that out. So the reason why I come to here is because I've got a lot of deep level access to what I need. But what I want to do is figure out whether it works or not in the first place. So I'll go back to just a simple AI prompt and start to just work through it without any code, without any decisions of where it's hosted, what it's doing. Can I take the simplest slice of what we're trying to do and drive AI with it and get it to work? Lastly, I want to just sort of pivot a little bit and show you what this looks like in a tool called the learning tool called Compass. The name will change. And this is the learning tool between teachers and students. And of course, something has happened at 5:53. But while we're looking at that, this is a tool that, all right, let me, no, that one. Let me log in. Oh my word. Okay. Let me just go back. I had it all prepared earlier. No, all right. All right, I'll pick that one. All right, let's go to there. You can see where my domain is hosted in this instance. All right, great. So I've jumped in. Over on the right-hand side are things that we can manage in the system. So things like the content. So remember, we're supplying all this stuff into the content, into the prompt, manage things like what are the rules around how we're going to assess what we're going to assess. And then I'll come back home and we'll go into geography, year 11 geography. So I'd like to look at, what some of the hazards are, and I can talk about this. I can do a multiple choice question. So this is just some early days on it, but I can jump into a chat and start to bring everything that we've spoken about together. So what we've paid a lot of attention to here is not to give the answer. So can you name one example of an atmospheric hazard? And I'll just say, no, I can't. And it goes away, has a think. And then we sort of limit the number of words, but also the number of interactions, so that it sort of doesn't give us the answer. So you can start to see here that atmospheric hazards include events like strong storms. So this is, I can go through here and then sort of exit, but have a chat as a student about topics that I'm learning in my year 11 geography that the teacher has unlocked for us to go and see. There's a lot more to it, but there's various learning paths, learning goals should be here somewhere, things like that. So because I'm a teacher, I've got, 4, I may, got sort of 4 in here. We can look at the various learning paths. We can update things, come down and sort of start to see when it's available, when it's not available, and then what some of the other factors and things like that are. So I'm just sort of giving you a bit of an example of the evolution of, going from sort of, this sort of stuff, logic apps, running agentic flows, through to really working out what you want AI to do for you and how you want it to do it, through to, through to a product like Compass, which is now currently being, piloted and, being worked through. So rather than just say, here's a whole bunch of sort of, theoretical stuff, it's actually out in the field and wild. So that brings me back to sort of the notes and essentially a wrap up. AI is only part of the answer. We really need to be mindful of the policies and security around that, largely given to us through AI Foundry. Where's your data? Who's controlling it? How are we getting to it? And then, keep it simple. Really, really important. So thank you very much for your time, folks, and Bill. And if you've got any questions, send them through as you're watching the video at a later date. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mick. That was really good. I got a fair bit out of that. And I mean, a lot of it, I've seen demos of just how to do it, but not a lot of the reasoning around why you're doing it, how you're doing it, what you need to think about, and all that kind of stuff. So that was very good. We haven't had any questions posted, but that's very good. So everybody will watch it and they can reach out to you if they got some questions after that. So thank you very much. And that'll be, unless you've got some closing remarks, that'll be all for today.
No, pleasure, Bill. Thanks for having me, and great to be supporting the community. We're all in it together.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Cheers, Bill. Bye.